The rain had finally stopped, but the cemetery ground remained muddy beneath Albert Thompson's dress shoes as he stood watching his son's mahogany casket being lowered into the earth. His throat tightened with unshed tears. 57 years old, and he'd never imagined he'd bury his own child. The preacher's words blurred together as Albert stared at the polished wood, trying to comprehend how a healthy 32-year-old man could simply die in a car accident. "Dad, are you okay?" Sarah, his daughter-in-law, placed her hand on his arm. Her touch felt cold even through his suit jacket. She looked appropriately grief-stricken. In her black dress, mascara slightly smudged, but something about her demeanor bothered him. Maybe it was the way she kept checking her phone, or how she'd handled all of the funeral arrangements without asking for his input. He'd chalked it up to her way of coping with grief, but now he wondered. "I'm fine," Albert lied, forcing a weak smile. "Just trying to process all this." The twins, Emma and Jake, stood close to their mother, both 9 years old, and barely understanding why Daddy wasn't coming home. Emma kept asking when they could visit him again, and Jake hadn't spoken since the accident 3 days ago. Looking at them made Albert's chest ache even more. They needed stability now, not an old man drowning in his own sorrow. As the service concluded, and people began to disperse, offering their condolences and empty promises to call if you need anything, Albert felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. He almost ignored it, who would text during a funeral, but something made him pull it out discreetly. The message sender showed Marcus's name. Albert's blood turned to ice. "Dad, I'm alive. Don't trust anyone. Mom didn't die of natural causes." His hands started trembling so violently, he nearly dropped the phone. He looked around frantically, expecting to see someone playing a cruel joke, but everyone was focused on leaving or talking in hushed tones. Sarah was accepting sympathy from neighbors, the perfect grieving widow. Albert read the message again, his heart hammering against his ribs. Mom didn't die of natural causes. Helen, his wife, of 35 years, had passed away 2 years ago, after what doctors called a sudden heart condition. She'd been taking medication for months before she died, getting weaker and more confused. Sarah had been so helpful during that time, driving Helen to doctor appointments, managing her medications, staying overnight when Helen had bad episodes. "Albert, you look pale. Are you having chest pains?" Dr. Morrison, their family physician for 20 years, appeared beside him with genuine concern. "I'm fine," Albert managed quickly, shoving the phone back into his pocket. Just overwhelmed. But he wasn't fine. Nothing was fine. Dead people don't send text messages. Yet there it was, sitting in his phone, like a digital ghost, using words that sounded exactly like something Marcus would say. Marcus had always been protective of his mother, even after she died. He'd questioned some of the medical decisions, wondered why Helen had declined so rapidly when she'd been relatively healthy just months before. "Grandpa Albert, can we go home now?" Emma tugged at his jacket, her small face streaked with tears. "I don't like this place." Albert knelt down to her level, trying to compose himself. "Of course, sweetheart. We can go home." Sarah approached them, keys jingling in her hand. "I'll drive you back to your place, Albert. You shouldn't be alone today. There was something in her tone, an insistence that made him uncomfortable. Since Marcus died, she'd been almost hovering, bringing meals. He didn't ask for, offering to handle paperwork, suggesting he might want to downsize to a smaller place now that he was alone. At the time, he'd thought she was being considerate. Now, with that message burning in his pocket, her attention felt suffocating. "That's thoughtful, Sarah, but I'll be fine driving myself," Albert said, standing up. "You need to get the kids home and settled." "Nonsense. You're in no condition to drive. Besides, we need to discuss some practical matters about Marcus's affairs." The way she said "practical matters" sent a chill down Albert's spine. He thought about Helen's final weeks, how Sarah had suddenly become the go-between for all medical information. She'd explained Helen's condition in simplified terms, as if Albert was too old or stupid to understand. She'd accompanied Helen to every appointment, claiming Albert's presence would stress her out. "What kind of practical matters?" Albert asked carefully. Sarah glanced around, making sure the twins were out of earshot. They were picking flowers from a nearby grave, innocent and oblivious to adult conversations. "Well, the house, for one thing. Marcus had been making payments on it. But now," she trailed off meaningfully, "and there are some insurance policies we need to discuss. Financial responsibilities." Helen had said something similar in her last days when she was lucid enough to talk. She'd grabbed Albert's hand with surprising strength and whispered, "Don't let her handle the money, Albert. Promise me." He'd thought it was the medication talking, making her paranoid and confused. Sarah had been right there adjusting Helen's pillows and giving Albert that sympathetic look that said she doesn't know what she's saying anymore. His phone buzzed again. With shaking fingers, Albert pulled it out, angling it away from Sarah's view. The medication Mom was taking checked the bottles. Sarah threw them away right after the funeral. Why? This time, Albert couldn't hide his reaction. A strangled noise escaped his throat, and he had to grab a nearby headstone for support. Sarah was beside him instantly, her hand on his back. "Albert, what's wrong? You're scaring me." Albert looked into her face, studying it carefully for the first time in years. She looked concerned, but there was something else underneath, something calculating. How had he never noticed that before? I need some air," he said weakly. "Maybe I should go home and rest." "Of course, I'll drive you. The twins can ride with us." As they walked toward the cars, Albert caught his reflection in a car window. He looked like a broken old man, which is exactly what he'd been for the past 2 years. After Helen died, he'd let Sarah handle everything. She'd been so efficient, so caring. She'd made sure he ate, helped him sort through Helen's belongings, even suggested he might be happier in a retirement community where he'd have more support. But now, with those messages haunting him, Albert wondered if her helpfulness had been something else entirely. Control, maybe, or worse. The drive to his house felt eternal. Sarah chatted pleasantly about funeral details and how well everything had gone, while the twins dozed in the back seat. Albert nodded and made appropriate responses, but his mind was reeling. When they pulled into his driveway, Albert noticed she parked in the same spot Helen used to use, right next to the kitchen window. "I'll make you some tea." Sarah said, following him inside without invitation. You need to keep your strength up. As she bustled around his kitchen opening cabinets like she owned the place, Albert excused himself to the bathroom. Once the door was locked behind him, he pulled out his phone with trembling hands. The messages were still there, impossible and real. He typed back hesitantly, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "You know who this is. Check Mom's medicine cabinet. Look for the bottles Sarah said were expired." 3 days after the funeral, Albert couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Helen's face during those final weeks, confused, frightened, trying to tell him something he was too blind to understand. The messages had stopped coming, but they'd planted seeds of doubt that were growing into something darker. Albert sat at his kitchen table at 4 in the morning, surrounded by boxes he'd finally worked up the courage to retrieve from the garage. Sarah had packed Helen's belongings so efficiently after she died, insisting it would help him move forward. He'd let her grateful for her initiative when he was too broken to function. Now he wondered what she'd wanted hidden. The first box contained Helen's clothes, still smelling faintly of her perfume. Underneath her favorite sweater, Albert found something that made his heart skip, a small notebook he'd never seen before. Helen's careful handwriting covered the page's dates, spanning her last 6 months alive. March 15th. Feeling dizzy again after taking the new pills. Asked Sarah about them, but she says Dr. Morrison prescribed them. Can't remember him mentioning a change. March 22nd. Albert seems worried about me. I want to tell him something feels wrong, but Sarah says I'm just anxious about aging. Maybe she's right. April 3rd. Tried to call Dr. Morrison's office myself, but Sarah says she already has an appointment for next week. I don't remember making one. Albert's hands shook as he read. Helen had been documenting her symptoms, her confusion, her growing sense that something wasn't right. How had he missed this? How had he not seen what was happening right in front of him? The entries became more erratic. As the weeks passed, Helen's usually neat handwriting becoming shaky and uncertain. But the last entry, dated just 3 days before she died, was written in clear, desperate letters. Albert will never read this, but I need to write it down. I think Sarah is giving me the wrong medicine. The pills don't look like what Dr. Morrison showed me. When I asked her about it, she said I was getting confused, that they'd changed the color, but they were the same medication. But I found the old bottle in the trash. They're completely different. I tried to tell Albert, but Sarah was right there. And she gave me that look that says, I'm losing my mind. Maybe I am, but what if I'm not? Albert had to put the notebook down and walk to the sink, his stomach churning with nausea. Helen had known something was wrong, and he'd dismissed her concerns as the ramblings of a sick woman. Sarah had been there for every conversation, translating Helen's confusion into medical explanations Albert could understand. His phone rang, making him jump. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. It was barely dawn. Why was she calling so early? Albert, I hope I didn't wake you, but I couldn't sleep. I keep thinking about Marcus and how he'd want us to take care of each other. Her voice sounded tired but caring. I was wondering if you'd like me to come by later and help you sort through some of his things. That's that's very thoughtful, Sarah, but I think I need some time alone with his belongings. There was a pause. Of course I understand. But there are some documents he kept at the house that might be important, insurance papers, that sort of thing. I could bring them by this afternoon. Documents. Insurance papers. Helen had left a substantial life insurance policy that Albert had never thought to question. Sarah had handled all on the paperwork, explained the process, made sure he received the payout without any hassle. Now, he wondered what else she'd handled for him. Actually, Sarah, I was wondering about Helen's medication from before she passed. Do you remember what happened to those pill bottles? Another pause. Longer this time. Oh, Albert, you know, I threw those away right after the funeral. They were expired, and I thought it would be painful for you to have them around. Why do you ask? I found some of her notes, and she seemed confused about her medication toward the end. Poor Helen. Sarah's voice softened with what sounded like genuine sympathy. The doctor said confusion was common with her condition. She was getting so forgetful, mixing up her pills, taking them at the wrong times. That's why I started managing her medication for her. I was worried she'd accidentally take too much or not enough. And her explanation sounded reasonable, caring even, but it directly contradicted what Helen had written in her notebook. Helen claimed the pills themselves were different, not that she was confused about taking them. After hanging up, Albert spent the morning going through more of Helen's belongings. In a jewelry box, he found something that made his blood run cold, a small plastic bag containing 3 pills he didn't recognize. They were blue and oblong, completely different from the heart medication Dr. Morrison had originally prescribed. Helen must have saved them, maybe as proof that something wasn't right. Albert called Dr. Morrison's office as soon as they opened. Mr. Thompson, of course I remember Helen. Such a sweet woman. What can I help you with? Dr. Morrison, I'm trying to understand Helen's medication during her final months. There seems to be some confusion about what she was actually taking. Well, let me pull up her file. Albert heard typing in the background. That's odd. According to my records, Helen missed her last 3 scheduled appointments. I remember being concerned because she'd been doing so well on the new treatment plan. Albert's mouth went dry. She missed appointments, but Sarah said she was bringing Helen in regularly. Sarah, I'm sorry. Who is Sarah? My daughter-in-law? She said she was managing Helen's care, bringing her to appointments. More typing. Mr. Thompson, I don't show any record of a Sarah being involved in Helen's care. In fact, the last time I saw Helen was 4 months before she passed away. She seemed stable, then responding well to medication. I tried calling when she missed her appointments, but never got a response. The room began to spin around Albert. 4 months. Sarah had been telling him for 4 months that she was taking Helen to doctor visits that never happened. She'd been coming home with updates about Helen's condition, prescription changes, treatment, adjustments, all complete fabrications. Doctor, would you be able to identify some pills for me? I found some that might have been Helen's, but I don't recognize them. Certainly. Can you bring them in this afternoon? After making the appointment, Albert sat in his living room, staring at those 3 blue pills. Helen had hidden them for a reason. She documented her suspicions in a notebook that Sarah never knew existed. And now, Marcus was dead just months after he'd started asking questions about his mother's final days. Albert remembered a conversation from about 6 months ago. Marcus had stopped by unexpectedly and found him having what Sarah called a bad day. Albert had been agitated, claiming someone was trying to hurt him, grabbing Marcus's arm and begging him not to leave him alone. Sarah had calmly explained that these paranoid episodes were part of Albert's declining condition, that the medication sometimes caused confusion and fear. But what if Albert hadn't been confused? What if he'd been terrified because he knew exactly what was happening to him? Marcus had pulled Sarah aside that day and asked quietly, "Are you sure about handling all of Dad's medical care? Maybe we should get a second opinion, or at least be more involved in his treatment." Sarah had brushed off his concerns, told him she was a godsend, that Marcus couldn't manage his father's complex medical needs without her help. Marcus had looked troubled, but hadn't pressed the issue. He trusted Sarah to make the right decisions about his father's care. Now he was dead, and Albert was sitting alone with evidence that his wife might have been murdered. The pills felt heavier than they should in Albert's palm as he prepared to leave for Dr. Morrison's office. If these weren't Helen's prescribed medication, then what were they? And more importantly, who had been giving them to her? And why, as Albert locked the front door, he noticed Sarah's car parked across the street. She was just sitting there watching his house. When she saw him looking, she waved and rolled down her window. Albert. Perfect timing. I was just about to knock. I brought those documents I mentioned, plus some of Helen's medical records. I thought you might want them. Medical records. After 2 years, she was suddenly offering him Helen's medical records. The same records she'd always insisted were too complicated for him to understand. Dr. Morrison's face went pale when he examined the pills under his desk lamp. He'd been Albert's family's doctor for over 20 years, delivered both his children, held his hand through Helen's cancer scare 15 years ago. Albert had never seen him look so disturbed. Albert, these aren't heart medication. They're not even close. He set the pills down carefully, like they might explode. This appears to be a combination of sedatives and something else I can't identify without proper testing. Where exactly did you find these hidden in Helen's jewelry box? She must have saved them for some reason. If Helen was taking these instead of her prescribed heart medication, Dr. Morrison trailed off, shaking his head. Albert, this could have caused exactly the symptoms she experienced before she died. Confusion, weakness, heart irregularities. Her body was essentially being poisoned while her actual condition went untreated. The word poisoned hit Albert like a physical blow. He gripped the arms of his chair to keep from falling over. But Sarah said Helen was taking her prescribed medication. She managed everything, brought Helen to appointments. Albert, I need to tell you something else. Dr. Morrison leaned forward, his expression grave. After Helen died, your son Marcus came to see me. He had questions about her treatment, wanted copies of her medical records. I gave them to him, of course. He seemed troubled by what he found. Troubled how? He noticed the same discrepancies you're discovering now. The missed appointments. The fact that I hadn't seen Helen in months before she died. the medications that didn't match what I had prescribed. Marcus was quite upset when he left here. He said he was going to get to the bottom of what happened to his mother. Albert's hands started shaking again. Marcus had known. He'd figured out what Albert was just now understanding. And he died before he could expose it. The car accident that killed him, how convenient that had happened just as he was investigating Helen's death. Did Marcus say anything else? Did he mention Sarah specifically? Dr. Morrison hesitated. He asked me not to mention his visit to anyone in the family. Said he needed to gather more evidence before making any accusations. But he did ask me about the legality of someone impersonating a patient's caregiver to obtain medications. Albert felt sick. Marcus had been building a case against Sarah, and somehow she'd found out. The messages on Albert's phone suddenly made more sense. Maybe Marcus had set up some kind of delayed delivery system before he died insurance in case something happened to him. Doctor, I need you to document everything we've discussed today. And I need to know, is there any way to test these pools to find out exactly what they are? Absolutely. I'll send them to the lab immediately. Albert, if what we're suspecting is true, you need to contact the police. The drive home felt surreal. Albert kept thinking about Marcus's last few weeks, how he'd seemed distracted and worried. He'd started coming by the house more often, asking casual questions about Helen's final days, about Sarah's involvement in her care. Albert thought he was finally processing his grief, working through his guilt about not being more involved when his mother was dying. Instead, he'd been investigating a murder. When Albert pulled into his driveway, Sarah's car was still there. She was sitting on his front porch with the twins, apparently waiting for him to return. Emma ran to him as he got out of the car, wrapping her small arms around his waist. Grandpa Albert, Mommy brought cookies, and she says we can have a picnic in your backyard. Albert forced a smile, ruffling her hair, while studying Sarah's face. She looked perfectly normal, concerned, caring, maybe a little tired from dealing with funeral arrangements and grieving children. If he hadn't just learned what he'd learned, he would have been grateful for her thoughtfulness. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Why don't you and Jake go pick some flowers for the picnic table? As the twins scampered off toward Helen's old rose garden, Sarah approached him with a sympathetic expression. You look upset, Albert. Is everything okay? You were gone longer than expected. Just running some errands, taking care of some loose ends. Albert kept his voice carefully neutral. You mentioned you had some documents for me. Yes, of course. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. These are some of Marcus's insurance papers, and I found some of Helen's old medical records that might be important for closure. Medical records. The same records that Dr. Morrison said would show months of missed appointments and medications that were never prescribed. Was she actually going to hand him evidence of her own crimes? That's very thoughtful, Sarah. I've been wondering about Helen's final treatment. It all happened so fast, and I was so overwhelmed. Oh, Albert. And she reached out and touched his arm gently. You did everything you could. Helen's condition was so complicated, and you were dealing with your own health issues at the time. That's why it was so important that I stepped in to help coordinate her care. Her touch made Albert's skin crawl, but he forced himself not to pull away. "I'm just grateful you were there. I don't know what we would have done without you." She smiled, and for a moment it looked genuine. "Helen was like a mother to me. I couldn't bear to see her suffer, or to watch you struggle with something so difficult. Managing her medications, making sure she got to her appointments, interpreting what the doctors were saying, it was the least I could do." Every word was a lie, delivered with perfect sincerity. This woman had systematically poisoned his wife while convincing him. She was providing loving care. She'd isolated Helen from her actual medical team, fed her dangerous substances, and watched her deteriorate day by day. And when Marcus got too close to the truth, she'd found a way to silence him too. "Sarah, can I ask you something? The night Helen died, you were there with her, weren't you?" "Of course. I'd been staying overnight whenever she had bad episodes. Remember? You were so exhausted, and I was worried about leaving her alone." She paused, her expression growing sad. She seemed peaceful at the end. I think she knew it was time. Peaceful. Helen's final hours, according to Sarah, had been peaceful. But what if they hadn't been? What if Helen had realized what was happening to her? Tried to fight back, tried to call for help? What if her last moments had been filled with terror and betrayal? "The twins are having such a good time." Sarah continued watching Emma and Jake chase butterflies among the roses. "It's important for them to feel connected to family right now. They're going to need stability routine. Marcus would have wanted that." There was something in her tone when she mentioned Marcus. A subtle emphasis that sounded almost like a warning. Was she reminding him that the twins needed their mother? That losing Sarah would be devastating for them? "They're lucky to have you," Albert said carefully. "You've been such a strong support through all of this." "We're family, Albert. That's what family does." She smiled again, but this time Albert caught something cold in her eyes. "Though, I have to say, I'm a little worried about you. You seem different since the funeral, more agitated. Are you sleeping okay? Maybe you should see Dr. Morrison about something to help with the stress." The suggestion made Albert's blood run cold. Was she already planning her next move? First Helen, then Marcus, and now him. How long had she been thinking about this, planning each step? "I'm managing," Albert said. "Grief affects everyone differently."
So,
"Of course. But isolation isn't healthy, especially at our age. Maybe you should consider that retirement community we talked about. Some place where there are people around activities, medical support if you need it. Medical support under Sarah's supervision, no doubt. A place where an elderly man's declining health wouldn't raise suspicions. Where medications could be easily manipulated. Where a grieving widower might slowly fade away from natural causes." That evening, after Sarah and the twins left, Albert sat in his kitchen, reading through the documents she'd given him. The medical records were expertly forged. They showed regular appointments that never happened, medication adjustments that were never made, progress notes in handwriting that looked similar to Dr. Morrison's but wasn't quite right. She'd created an entire false medical history for Helen, complete documentation of a treatment plan that existed only on paper. If anyone had questioned Helen's death, these records would have supported the story of a woman with a serious heart condition who died despite receiving excellent care. But Marcus had gotten the real records from Dr. Morrison. He'd compared them to these fabricated ones and seen the discrepancies immediately. That's when he started digging deeper, asking more questions, getting closer to the truth. Albert's phone buzzed with another message. Check the garage behind the paint cans on the left side. I hid something there before I died. This time, Albert didn't hesitate. He grabbed a flashlight and headed out to the garage, his heart pounding with anticipation and dread. Behind the paint cans, exactly where the message described, he found a small metal box hidden under an old tarp. Inside was a digital recorder and a stack of photographs. His hands shook as he pressed play on the recorder and heard Marcus's voice, strained and angry. This is Marcus Thompson, recording on March 15th. I've been investigating my mother's death for 3 weeks now, and I'm convinced she was murdered. Sarah has been lying about everything, the doctor visits, the medications, all of it. I have proof that Mom never received the treatment Sarah claimed she was getting, and I found evidence that she was being given drugs that weren't prescribed by any doctor. The recording continued for 20 minutes, Marcus methodically laying out his evidence, his growing suspicions, his plans to confront Sarah with what he'd discovered. The photographs showed Helen in her final weeks looking confused and frightened, along with pictures of pill bottles that didn't match any prescriptions. The final entry on the recording, dated just 2 days before Marcus died, sent chills down Albert's spine. Sarah knows I'm investigating. She's been asking subtle questions about what I'm doing, where I'm going, who I'm talking to. I think she's planning something. If anything happens to me, if I have another accident, like Mom's supposed heart failure, I want there to be a record of what I discovered. Dad deserves to know the truth, even if it destroys our family. The recording continued playing in the dark garage, Marcus's voice growing more urgent with each entry. As Albert listened, a horrifying picture emerged of systematic manipulation that had been going on far longer than he'd realized. February 8th. I've been thinking about when Sarah really entered our lives. She didn't just marry me for love. She targeted our family. I found out she researched us for months before we met. She knew about Mom's previous heart condition, Dad's retirement, savings, the life insurance policies. This wasn't random. Albert's legs gave out, and he had to sit down on an old paint bucket. Sarah hadn't fallen in love with Marcus at that community college where they'd met. She'd hunted him, studied their family like a predator, choosing prey. February 12th. I confronted Sarah about missing one of Mom's doctor appointments she claimed to attend. She had an answer ready, said the appointment was rescheduled, but she forgot to mention it. But her story didn't match what Dr. Morrison's office told me. She's been lying for so long she has backup lies prepared for everything. The photos Marcus had hidden showed Sarah in their house during Helen's final weeks. In one image, she was standing over Helen's bedside table, holding a pill bottle Albert didn't recognize. Helen was asleep in the background, looking pale and fragile. In another photo, Sarah was going through Helen's purse when she thought no one was watching. February 20th. I found out Sarah has access to Mom's bank accounts. She convinced Dad to add her as a backup signer in case of emergencies. She's been making small withdrawals, nothing large enough to raise suspicions, but it adds up. She's been stealing from them while slowly killing Mom. Bank accounts. Albert had completely forgotten about that. Sarah had been so helpful after Helen started getting confused about finances, offering to help manage bills and medical expenses. Albert had gratefully signed the paperwork, relieved to have one less thing to worry about. How much money had she taken over the months? How long had she been planning this? March 1st. The worst part is watching Dad buyout her completely. She's isolated him from making any medical decisions, convinced him that he's too emotional, and stressed to handle the complexity of Mom's condition. She's made herself indispensable while erasing everyone else from Mom's care. Dad doesn't even realize he's not allowed in the room during Mom's treatments. The memories came flooding back. How many times had Sarah gently suggested Albert wait in the living room while she helped Helen with her medication? How often had she explained that Helen was having a difficult day and didn't want visitors? Even from her own husband, Albert had thought she was protecting Helen's dignity during her illness. Instead, she'd been hiding evidence of what she was doing. March 10th. I think Sarah is getting ready to end Mom's life soon. She's been talking about how much Mom is suffering, how peaceful it would be if she could just let go. She's preparing Dad emotionally for Mom's death while positioning herself as the compassionate caregiver who made Mom's final days bearable. It's sick. The final photos in the stack showed Sarah's true face. Images Marcus must have taken secretly catching her in unguarded moments. In one, she was smiling coldly while looking through Helen's jewelry box. In another, she was on the phone, her expression calculating and predatory. These were not the loving, concerned looks she'd shown Albert. This was someone who enjoyed the power she held over their family. The last recording entry made Albert's blood freeze. March 12th. Sarah cornered me today and asked directly what I was doing, where I'd been going, who I'd been talking to. She knows I'm on tour. She tried to make it sound casual, like she was worried about my grief affecting my judgment, but I could see the panic in her eyes. She's scared I'm going to expose her before she finishes whatever she's planning. There was a long pause in the recording. Then Marcus's voice continued quieter now. If something happens to me, if I have an accident, or suddenly get sick, it won't be coincidental. Sarah is smart and patient, but she's also ruthless. She's been planning Mom's death for months, maybe years. She won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens her plan. Dad, if you're listening to this, please don't trust her. Don't let her convince you that you need her help. And whatever you do, don't let her handle any of your medical care or finances. The recording ended there. 2 days later, Marcus was dead. Albert sat in the darkness of the garage, holding the evidence his son had gathered before Sarah murdered him. The weight of his own blindness was crushing. For 2 years he'd grieved for Helen, and felt grateful to Sarah for being such a devoted daughter-in-law. He'd let her comfort him, handle funeral arrangements, manage practical matters. He'd even started to think of her as the daughter he'd never had. She'd been planning to kill him too. The pattern was clear now. Sarah had researched their family, identified Helen as the vulnerable target with both money and medical conditions that could be exploited. She'd maneuvered herself into a caregiver role, isolated Helen from her actual medical team, and slowly poisoned her while documenting a false narrative of declining health. When Marcus got suspicious, she'd eliminated him and made it look like an accident. Now she was positioning herself to inherit everything, not just through Marcus's death, but by becoming Albert's trusted companion in his old age. She'd already suggested he might be more comfortable in a retirement facility. How long before he started having health issues that required her assistance? Albert's phone rang, making him jump. Sarah's name on the screen made his stomach clench, but he forced himself to answer normally. "Albert, I hope I'm not calling too late, but I'm worried about you. You seemed so distracted this afternoon, and I found some pills in your driveway after we left. Did you drop your medication?" Pills in his driveway. Albert hadn't dropped anything. Was she already beginning to plant evidence that he was becoming forgetful? Potentially dangerous to himself? "No, I don't think those were mine," Albert said. "Oh, that's concerning. Maybe someone else dropped them, but they looked like heart medication. You know how important it is to take your pills regularly, especially with all this stress. Maybe I should come by tomorrow and help you organize your medications. Sometimes when we're grieving, it's easy to get confused about dosages and timing." There it was. The same gentle, caring tone she'd used with Helen. The suggestion that Albert might be getting confused, that he needed her help to manage something as basic as taking his own medication. She was already starting the process that would end with his death. "That's very thoughtful, Sarah, but I'm managing fine." "Of course you are. You're such a strong man, Albert." "But even strong men need support sometimes. Helen used to worry about you, you know. She made me promise to look after you if anything ever happened to her." The lie was delivered with such sincerity that if Albert hadn't known the truth, he would have been touched by her devotion. Helen had never made any such promise. Helen had been terrified of Sarah in her final days, trying to warn Albert about something he was too blind to see. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" That night, Helen died. "You said she seemed peaceful. Can you tell me more about her final hours?" There was a slight pause. "Oh, Albert, are you sure you want to hear the details? It might be painful. I need to know. I've been having dreams about her, wondering if she suffered." "Well, if you're certain." Sarah's voice took on a gentle practiced tone. Helen had been having a difficult day. She was confused, agitated, saying things that didn't make sense. She kept asking for you, but I thought it would be too upsetting for you to see her like that. I stayed with her, held her hand, kept her comfortable. What kind of things was she saying? Oh, you know how the medication affected her mind toward the end. She was convinced someone was trying to hurt her, that her pills were the wrong color, that she couldn't trust anyone. The paranoia was heartbreaking, but I kept reassuring her, telling her she was safe, that everyone loved her. Helen hadn't been paranoid. She'd been trying to save her own life, and Sarah had been there to make sure she couldn't. The image of his wife, frightened and helpless, begging for help that never came, made Albert want to scream. Did she ask for me specifically? Constantly. But Albert, she wasn't really herself anymore. She might have been frightened if you'd seen her in that condition. I thought it was kinder to let her remember you the way you were during your good times together. Another lie. Sarah had kept Albert away, so Helen couldn't tell him what was really happening. She'd isolated Helen completely in her final hours, making sure there were no witnesses to whatever she'd done to end Helen's life. I kept talking to her about happy memories, your wedding day, when the children were born, family vacations. I think it comforted her. And then very peacefully she just slipped away. There was no pain, no struggle. It was almost beautiful in a way. Albert closed his eyes, fighting back tears of rage and grief. Thank you for being there for her. And for telling me. Of course, family takes care of family. That's what Helen would have wanted. After hanging up, Albert sat alone with Marcus's evidence and the full weight of what Sarah had done. She'd killed his wife slowly, methodically, while he thanked her for her kindness. She'd murdered his son when he threatened to expose her. And now she was positioning herself to kill Albert, too, probably within the next few months. The twins would inherit everything with Sarah as their guardian and trustee. She'd have access to Helen's life insurance, Albert's retirement savings, the house, everything, and 2 young children whose father had died mysteriously and whose grandmother had been their only remaining family. What would happen to them once Sarah had everything she wanted? Would they suffer accidents too, once they were old enough to ask inconvenient questions? The realization that Sarah might eventually harm those children filled Albert with a cold fury that burned away his fear. He might be a foolish old man who had let his family be destroyed, but he wasn't going to let her hurt Emma and Jake. He needed help, professional help. The evidence was substantial, but scattered. He needed someone who could help him build a case strong enough to stop Sarah and protect the twins. With shaking hands, Albert dialed the police. Albert sat opposite Detective Martinez, who listened to Marcus's recordings with the kind of focused intensity that told him she believed every word. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. When he'd called the police that morning, he'd been terrified they wouldn't take an old man's suspicions seriously. But Martinez treated Marcus's evidence like the roadmap to a murder case. Mr. Thompson, this is substantial evidence, but we need more to make arrests, she said carefully, placing the recorder back in its box. Sarah has been planning this for years. She's going to have explanations for everything, documentation to support her story. We need to catch her in the act. Albert leaned forward in his chair. What do you mean? I mean, we need you to play along. Let her think her plan is working. If she believes you're starting to decline, mentally or physically, she might accelerate her timeline and make mistakes. The idea of pretending to trust Sarah while she tried to kill him was terrifying. But Albert knew Martinez was right. Sarah was too careful, too prepared for accusations. She'd have medical records, witness statements, a complete narrative that painted her as the devoted caregiver, and him as a confused old man making wild allegations. What exactly are you asking me to do? Martinez's eyes reflected determination that matched his growing resolve. Let her help you with your medication, but we'll replace your actual pills with harmless substitutes that look identical. Everything she gives you will be documented and tested. If she's adding anything to your medication or substituting different drugs, we'll have concrete proof. Martinez explained the plan in detail. Albert would wear a wire during conversations with Sarah. Cameras would be installed in his house to record anything she did when he wasn't watching. Most importantly, He had to act vulnerable, confused, like he was beginning to decline the way Helen had. The hardest part will be acting grateful for her help, Martinez warned. You'll have to let her believe she's successfully manipulating you while we gather evidence. Can you do that? Albert thought about Helen's terrified face in those final days, about Marcus dying alone in his car, about Emma and Jake losing everyone who truly loved them. Yes, I can do that. That afternoon, Albert called Sarah and asked for her help organizing his medications. He made his voice sound tired, uncertain, like he was admitting a weakness he'd been hiding. I think you were right about me getting confused. I found some pills scattered on the kitchen floor this morning, and I can't remember if I took my heart medication yesterday. Maybe I do need help keeping track of everything. Sarah's response was immediate, almost eager. Oh, Albert, I'm so glad you called. I've been worried sick about you. I'll be right over. She arrived within 20 minutes, carrying a large bag and wearing the expression of loving concern that had fooled him for so long. But now, knowing what she really was, Albert could see the calculation behind her sympathy. Don't be embarrassed about this, she said, unpacking pill organizers and notebooks from her bag. Memory issues are completely normal at your age, especially with all the stress you've been under. The important thing is recognizing when you need support. Albert watched her work separating his medications into daily compartments, making notes about dosages and timing. She was thorough, professional, exactly what you'd want in a caregiver. The wire taped to his chest felt heavy as a stone. I brought some additional supplements that might help with your energy and mental clarity, she said, pulling out bottles he didn't recognize. My friend Janet's father had similar issues, and these made a real difference for him. Supplements just like the medicine she'd given Helen. Albert forced himself to nod gratefully, while she explained how the new pills would help with his confusion and fatigue. Everything she said was perfectly reasonable, delivered with genuine seeming care. Sarah, I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done for our family. I don't know what I would have done without you these past 2 years. Her smile was radiant. You're like a father to me, Albert. After my own parents died, you and Helen welcomed me into your family completely. Taking care of you isn't a burden. It's a privilege. The lies rolled off her tongue so smoothly, Albert almost believed them himself. She'd never mentioned dead parents before. Was that even true? Or just another manipulation designed to make him feel sorry for her? I've been thinking about what you said about the retirement community. Albert continued, hating every word. Maybe you're right. This house, it is too big for me now, and I worry about managing everything alone. Oh, Albert, I think that would be wonderful for you. There's a lovely place about 20 minutes from here, Sunset Manor. They have excellent medical staff activities, people your own age to socialize with, and I could visit regularly, make sure you're settling in well. Sunset Manor, where she could control his medications without interference, where his declining health wouldn't raise suspicions, where he could die peacefully of natural causes with no one to question the circumstances. Over the next week, Albert played his part perfectly. He called Sarah when he couldn't remember whether he'd taken his pills. He mentioned feeling dizzy and confused. He let her find him sitting in Helen's chair, staring at nothing, looking lost and helpless. She responded exactly as Martinez had predicted. The supplements increased in number and frequency. She started staying overnight occasionally, claiming she was worried about leaving him alone. She brought brochures for Sunset Manor and scheduled a tour just to look around. Most disturbing was how she began treating him like a child. She spoke more slowly, repeated things unnecessarily, made decisions without consulting him. She was conditioning him to accept dependency the same way she'd conditioned Helen. "Albert, I found these pills scattered on the bathroom floor," she said one morning, showing him capsules he'd never seen before. "You must have dropped them. It's so important to be more careful. These are your heart medications." They weren't his heart medications. Martinez had already confirmed that the pills Sarah was giving him contained sedatives and other drugs designed to cause confusion and weakness, but Albert nodded apologetically and let her lecture him about being more careful with his medication. The cameras Martinez had installed captured everything. Sarah going through his personal papers when she thought he was napping. Sarah making phone calls about his declining condition to people he'd never heard of. Sarah researching his financial accounts on her laptop while sitting at his kitchen table. Most chilling was a conversation she had on the phone while Albert was supposedly asleep upstairs. The camera in the living room recorded her side of the conversation clearly. "He's deteriorating faster than expected," she said, her voice completely different from the gentle tone she used with Albert. "The confusion is getting worse, and he's having trouble managing basic tasks. I think we can accelerate the timeline." There was a pause while the person on the other end responded. "No, he doesn't suspect anything. He's grateful for the help. He actually asked me about Sunset Manor yesterday. I think he's ready to make the move." Another pause. "The will is already updated. Everything goes to the grandchildren with me as trustee until they're adults. Once he's in the facility, it should only take a few months. Natural causes gradual decline. Very sad, but not unexpected at his age." A few months. She was planning to kill him within a few months of moving him to Sunset Manor. The casual way she discussed his murder like it was a minor inconvenience to be managed made Albert's blood run cold. The final piece of evidence came when Sarah thought Albert was having a particularly bad episode. She'd given him double the usual dose of her supplements, and he was pretending to be barely conscious, slumped in his chair with his eyes half closed. She pulled out her phone and called someone. "It's me. I think he's having some kind of reaction to the medication. He's barely responsive." Her voice was excited, not worried. Should I call an ambulance or wait and see what happens? She was hoping he would die right there, that the drug she'd given him would cause a heart attack or stroke that would end everything without the need for Sunset Manor. When Albert didn't obligingly die, she seemed almost disappointed. "No, he's stabilizing. False alarm, but it shows how fragile he's becoming. We definitely need to move forward with the facility placement." That night, after Sarah left, Albert met with Detective Martinez to review the evidence they'd gathered, the recordings, the drug tests, the surveillance footage. It was more than enough to prove what Sarah had done to Helen and Marcus, and what she was planning to do to Albert. "We're ready to move," Martinez said. "Tomorrow morning we'll arrest her at her house. We'll also have Child Protective Services ready to take custody of the twins temporarily until we can arrange for other family members to care for them. Albert thought about Emma and Jake, who would wake up tomorrow to find their mother arrested for murder. They'd lost their father, their grandmother, and now they were about to lose the only parent they had left. Even if that parent was a killer, what will happen to them? We'll find appropriate placement. Do you have other family members who could take them? He did. Helen's sister lived in Oregon. Had always been good with children. She'd take Emma and Jake, give them the loving home they deserved, but they would grow up knowing their mother had murdered their father and grandmother. They would carry that burden for the rest of their lives. Detective, I need to ask you something. When you arrest Sarah, will the twins be there? Probably. We're planning to execute the warrant early, before they leave for school. Albert closed his eyes, imagining their confusion and terror as police officers handcuffed their mother and took her away. Is there any way to arrest her somewhere else? The children don't need to see that. Martinez considered this. We could arrange for her to meet you somewhere public tomorrow morning. A restaurant, maybe, or a park. Once she's away from the house, we could move in. I'll call her tonight. Tell her I want to discuss the Sunset Manor arrangements over breakfast. She'll come running. She thinks she's finally getting what she wants. As Albert drove home to make that call, he felt a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. Tomorrow, Sarah would pay for what she'd done to his family. But justice wouldn't bring Helen and Marcus back. It wouldn't erase the years of manipulation and lies. It wouldn't heal the damage done to those innocent children. Still, it was something. After months of being Sarah's victim, he was finally taking control. Helen and Marcus would have justice, and Emma and Jake would be safe from the woman who had destroyed their family while pretending to love them. Albert picked up the phone to call Sarah, his hands steady for the first time in weeks. Dear. Sarah arrived at Maple Street Diner exactly on time, carrying a folder full of Sunset Manor paperwork and wearing her most caring smile. She slid into the booth across from him, already talking about room options and medical care coordination. She had no idea that Detective Martinez and 3 other officers were positioned around the restaurant waiting for Albert's signal. I'm so proud of you for making this decision, Albert, she said, spreading brochures across the table. This is going to be wonderful for you. You'll have round-the-clock medical support, social activities, and I'll be able to visit regularly to make sure you're adjusting well. Albert nodded, playing his part one last time. I've been thinking about what you said about not being a burden to family. Helen wouldn't want me struggling alone. Exactly. Helen would want you to be safe and comfortable, and the twins need to see that responsible decisions are being made for their grandfather. It sets a good example for them about taking care of elderly family members. The casual way she mentioned Emma and Jake made Albert's stomach clench. Those children were still part of her long-term plan, somehow. Maybe inheritance wasn't her only motivation. Maybe she needed guardianship of Helen's grandchildren to maintain her image as the devoted family caretaker. Sarah, before we sign anything, I need to ask you something that's been bothering me. Her expression didn't change, but Albert caught a brief flicker in her eyes. Of course. What is it? The night Helen died, you said she seemed peaceful, but I keep thinking about something she told me a few days before that. She said she was scared that something was wrong with her medication. Did she ever mention that to you? Sarah's smile never wavered. Oh, Albert, Helen said so many confused things toward the end. The medication affected her mind, made her paranoid and frightened. She was convinced people were trying to hurt her, that her pills were poison and all sorts of heartbreaking delusions. I tried to reassure her, but when someone's mind is going, logic doesn't help much. But what if she wasn't confused? What if something really was wrong? For just a moment, Sarah's mask slipped. Her eyes went cold, calculating before the concerned expression returned. Albert, I know this is hard to accept, but Helen's mind was failing. The paranoia, the accusations, the fear, those were symptoms of her condition. I have all the medical records if you want to review them again. I'd like that. Maybe it would help me understand what happened. Of course, though I should warn you, some of the details might be upsetting. Helen said some very harsh things about me toward the end. Accused me of terrible things. I know she didn't mean them, but they were painful to hear. Helen's accusations hadn't been delusions. They'd been desperate attempts to save her own life, but Sarah was still trying to discredit his wife's final words to make sure Albert dismissed anything Helen might have told him. What kind of things did she say? Sarah hesitated, as if reluctant to repeat hurtful words. She claimed I was giving her the wrong medications, that I was trying to poison her. She even said I was stealing money from your accounts. It was heartbreaking because I loved her so much, and the disease made her see me as an enemy. Every word was a confession delivered as a denial. Sarah was telling him exactly what she'd done while portraying herself as the innocent victim of Helen's deteriorating mind. That must have been very difficult for you. It was, but I understood it wasn't really Helen talking. It was the illness. That's why I never mentioned these episodes to you or Marcus. You were already suffering enough without hearing your wife's confused accusations against someone who was trying to help her. Marcus, she'd just admitted that she'd hidden Helen's pleas for help from her own son. She'd isolated Helen so completely that even her children didn't know she was begging for rescue. Albert reached into his jacket and touched the small device Detective Martinez had given him, the signal that would bring the officers rushing in. But he needed one more piece of the puzzle. Sarah, I have to ask about Marcus, too. His death was so sudden, so unexpected. Did he ever mention being worried about anything problems at work, financial stress, anything that might explain why he was driving so recklessly that night? Her expression grew genuinely sad. Marcus was struggling Albert. He'd been asking a lot of questions about Helen's death, second-guessing the medical care she received. He was consumed with guilt about not being more involved in her treatment. I think he blamed himself for letting me handle everything. What kind of questions? He wanted to see Helen's medical records, wanted to talk to her doctors, kept asking about the medications she was taking. He couldn't accept that sometimes people just die even with good medical care. The guilt was eating him alive. She paused, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. The night before the accident, he called me very upset. He said he'd been investigating Helen's death, that he thought something wasn't right about her treatment. He was talking about going to the police with his suspicions. I tried to calm him down, told him grief was affecting his judgment, but he wouldn't listen. A chill went down Albert's spine. She was admitting that Marcus had called her the night before he died, that he'd threatened to expose her. She was practically confessing to his murder while pretending to grieve for him. Do you think his emotional state might have contributed to the accident? I think he was distracted, obsessed with conspiracy theories about his mother's death instead of focusing on healing and moving forward. It's tragic, but when someone's mind is consumed with paranoid thoughts, they're not safe to be driving or making rational decisions. There it was. Sarah's explanation for why Marcus had died. He'd been mentally unstable, obsessed with false theories, unable to think clearly. If anyone investigated his death more thoroughly, she had a complete narrative ready to explain his behavior. Albert looked across the table at this woman who had systematically destroyed his family, while convincing him she was saving it. She'd murdered his wife, slowly, methodically, while he thanked her for her devotion. She'd killed his son when he threatened to expose her. And now she was planning to murder him, while positioning herself to control his grandchildren's inheritance. The most chilling part was how convinced she seemed of her own righteousness. In her mind, she wasn't a killer. She was a problem solver. Helen had been suffering, so she had ended that suffering. Marcus had been a threat, so she had eliminated him. Albert was a burden, so she was arranging for him to die peacefully in a facility where his decline would seem natural. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you," Albert said, his voice steady despite the fury burning in his chest. "I know what you did to Helen. I know what you did to Marcus. And I know what you're planning to do to me." Her expression didn't change for several seconds. Then slowly, the concerned smile faded, replaced by something cold and reptilian. "Albert, you're having another episode. The stress and medication are affecting your judgment again. You're saying things that don't make sense. I found Marcus's recording equipment. I have evidence of everything you've done." Her eyes darted around the restaurant, probably looking for escape routes or witnesses, but her voice remained calm, patronizing. "Sweetheart, there is no recording equipment. Marcus didn't leave any evidence because there was nothing to record. You're having paranoid delusions, just like Helen did toward the end." She was still trying to gaslight him, to convince him that reality was a product of his failing mind. But Albert was done being manipulated. He pressed the signal device. Within seconds, Detective Martinez and 3 officers converged on their booth. Sarah's face went white as Martinez showed her badge and spoke the words that ended her reign of terror. "Sarah Thompson, you're under arrest for the murders of Helen Thompson and Marcus Thompson, and for the attempted murder of Albert Thompson." As they read her rights, Sarah's composure finally cracked. She looked directly at Albert, her mask falling away completely to reveal the cold predator underneath. "You foolish old man, do you have any idea what you've just done to those children? Emma and Jake will grow up knowing their mother is in prison because of you. You've destroyed their lives." Even in handcuffs, she was trying to manipulate him to make him feel guilty for stopping her. But Albert thought about Helen's terrified face in those final days, about Marcus dying alone because he'd discovered the truth, about Emma and Jake growing up under the influence of their father's killer. "I've saved their lives," Albert said quietly, "just like I should have saved Helen's and Marcus's." As they led Sarah away, she called back to him one last time. "Those children will never forgive you for this. You'll die alone, and they'll remember you as the man who took their mother away." But Emma and Jake wouldn't remember him that way, because they were never going to know the whole truth. Helen's sister Margaret had agreed to take them in to raise them with love and stability. They would grow up believing their mother had made mistakes that landed her in prison. But they would never know she was a killer. That burden would die with Albert. The next few days passed in a blur of police procedures, legal meetings, and quiet, gut-wrenching conversations with Emma and Jake. Albert had insisted on being present when Margaret arrived to take custody of the twins, dreading their confusion and fear. The memory of their small faces, bewildered and tear-stained as they asked where their mother was, would haunt him forever. Margaret had been a rock through it all. Helen's sister shared the same calm strength, the quiet dignity that had drawn Albert to Helen all those years ago. She knelt before the children with gentle honesty. "Your mommy has done some things that were very wrong, and she has to go away for a while. You're going to come live with me in Oregon, where we have a big yard and a dog named Rusty, who's very excited to meet you." Albert had watched Emma's lower lip tremble as she clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter. "But why can't we stay with Grandpa Albert?" The question had pierced him like a physical wound. He wanted nothing more than to keep them close to protect them, as he'd failed to protect their father and grandmother. But at 57, with his own health concerns and the emotional trauma of the past weeks, he knew he couldn't provide the stability they needed. "Because Grandpa needs to sort some things out," Margaret had explained smoothly. "But he'll visit often, and you can talk on the phone whenever you want." Jake, silent as always, since Marcus's death, had simply reached for Albert's hand, his small fingers curling around Albert's weathered ones in a grip so tight it spoke volumes. In that moment, Albert had made a silent promise to both children. He would be there for them not as a daily guardian, but as the keeper of their family's truth, edited to protect their innocence, but honest enough to honor their father's memory. 6 months later, Albert sat in his attorney's office, signing the final papers to sell his house. The familiar neighborhood held too many painful memories, too many ghosts lingering in empty rooms. The modest 3-bedroom home where he and Helen had raised their family, where they'd celebrated birthdays and holidays, where they'd grown old together, would belong to a young couple expecting their first child. There was something right about that, a sense of continuity that brought him a measure of peace. "Everything seems to be in order, Mr. Thompson." The attorney slid the documents across the polished desk. "The proceeds will be transferred to your account by the end of the week. Are you sure about the trust fund structure for your grandchildren?" "Absolutely. Equal portions for Emma and Jake, accessible when they turn 25, with provisions for education expenses before that. Margaret will have no access to the principal amount, only the designated monthly stipend for their care. Albert had learned his lesson about financial control. Never again would someone use his family's money as a weapon against them. The attorney nodded, satisfied. And the new place in Portland all set? Yes, it's a small condo near Margaret's home. Close enough to see the kids regularly, but with my own space. Albert's lips curved into a slight smile. It even has a spare bedroom for when they're old enough for sleepovers with Grandpa. As he stepped out of the attorney's office into the crisp autumn air, Albert felt a weight lifting. The legal aftermath of Sarah's crimes had been extensive, untangling her financial manipulations, documenting the evidence for the prosecution, preparing for a trial that ultimately never happened because Sarah accepted a plea deal when faced with the overwhelming evidence against her. 25 years without possibility of parole. She would be an old woman when she emerged from prison if she survived that long. Albert's phone vibrated in his pocket. A text from Margaret with a photo attached. Emma and Jake sat on the front porch of their new home, flanking a shaggy golden retriever, both children sporting tentative smiles. The caption read, "Rusty approves of his new humans. When are you arriving?" His flight was scheduled for the following morning. A new beginning in a new city. Not what he'd imagined for his retirement years, but then nothing about the past 3 years had followed the script he'd expected for his later life. As Albert packed the last of his belongings that evening, he came across a photo album he hadn't opened in years. The leather cover was worn smooth from handling the pages, slightly yellowed with age. He settled into his armchair, one of the few pieces of furniture not yet loaded onto the moving truck, and began turning pages, slowly traveling back through decades of family history. There was Helen on their wedding day, young and radiant, in her simple white dress, looking at him with such trust and hope it made his chest ache. Marcus as a toddler, taking his first wobbly steps across their living room floor. Family vacations, school graduations, everyday moments preserved in glossy rectangles of memory. Sarah appeared in later photos. The smiling girlfriend, the beaming bride, the proud new mother holding infant twins. Had she been planning it even then? Had she chosen Marcus specifically because of his family background, his mother's heart condition, his father's comfortable retirement savings? The detectives had uncovered evidence suggesting Sarah had researched their family extensively before, coincidentally, meeting Marcus in that community college class. She'd created an elaborate persona designed to appeal to him, sharing his interest in photography, claiming to love the same obscure bands, expressing the same desire for a close-knit family. Albert closed the album, unable to bear looking at her face anymore. The depth of her devotion was unfathomable. How does someone spend years living among a family, sharing holidays and birthdays, witnessing intimate moments of joy and sorrow, all while calculating how to destroy them? It went beyond mere sociopathy into something darker, a void where a human soul should reside. Detective Martinez had shared some of the psychological evaluation after Sarah's arrest. She's what we call a predatory caregiver, Martinez had explained during one of their meetings. She derives a sense of power from controlling vulnerable people, particularly the elderly. In her mind, she's not doing anything wrong. She's simply hastening an inevitable end while benefiting herself. These types often have histories in health care or elder care facilities where they can access potential victims. Further investigation had revealed 2 suspicious deaths at a retirement home where Sarah had worked briefly as an aide before meeting Marcus. Elderly residents with no close family whose entire estates had been left to their devoted caretaker through last-minute will changes. The cases had been reopened, adding additional charges to Sarah's growing list of crimes. Albert's doorbell rang, interrupting his dark reflections. Through the peephole, he recognized Dr. Morrison's familiar face. The family physician had become an unexpected ally and friend throughout the ordeal, providing crucial testimony about Helen's medical history and the foreign substances found in those preserved pills. "Thought I'd stop by to say goodbye before you head west." Dr. Morrison stepped inside, carrying a small package wrapped in blue paper. "Just a little going-away present." Albert unwrapped it to find a handsome leather-bound journal with his initials embossed on the cover. "Helen always said writing things down helped her make sense of the world," Dr. Morrison explained. "Thought it might help you too processing everything that's happened." "Thank you." Albert ran his fingers over the smooth leather. "I've been thinking a lot about Helen lately, wondering if I'll ever forgive myself for not seeing what was happening to her." Dr. Morrison's expression grew serious. Albert's Sarah fooled everyone, medical professionals, family, friends. She was extraordinarily skilled at manipulation. Don't carry that burden of guilt to Oregon with you. Helen wouldn't want that. After the doctor left, Albert opened the journal to its first blank page. The pristine paper seemed to invite confession, a place to pour out the tangled emotions he'd been carrying for months. He began to write hesitantly at first, then with increasing fluency, as words flowed from his pen. "Dearest Helen and Marcus, I'm starting a new chapter tomorrow, moving to be near the twins. They're doing as well as can be expected, considering everything they've lost. Emma talks about you both often, keeping your memories alive in her own way. Jake still rarely speaks, but he's starting to draw again. Mostly pictures of our family, always with you both included. Writing to his deceased wife and son felt strangely comforting, as if they might somehow receive his messages across the veil that separated them." Albert continued late into the night, chronicling the events since their deaths, his discoveries, his regrets, and finally, his hopes for healing in the years ahead. The journal became his constant companion in the months that followed his move to Portland. He established a quiet routine in his new home: morning coffee on the small balcony, overlooking a neighborhood park, afternoons often spent with Emma and Jake, evenings dedicated to documenting family stories and memories he wanted the children to have someday. Margaret proved to be not just a capable guardian for the twins, but a compassionate ally for Albert himself. Having lost her own husband to cancer years earlier, she understood grief's unpredictable tides, the way it could recede for weeks, only to crash back with devastating force at the most unexpected moments. "You're good with them," she observed one Sunday afternoon as they watched the twins playing with Rusty in the backyard. "They light up when you arrive." "I'm the fun grandpa who brings presents and doesn't enforce bedtime," Albert replied with a self-deprecating smile. "You're doing the real work." Margaret shook her head. "They need both, structure and stability from me, but also the connection to their past that only you can provide. You're the bridge to their father, to their grandmother." "That's invaluable, Albert." The children were adapting at different paces. Emma, outgoing and verbal, asked questions constantly about her father, about what he was like as a little boy, about things he enjoyed. She collected these stories like precious treasures, incorporating them into her understanding of herself. Jake remained largely silent, communicating primarily through nods, shakes of his head, and increasingly elaborate drawings. His school counselor assured them this selective mutism was a normal response to trauma and would likely resolve with time and consistent support. Over the months, he had begun to write short notes to communicate more complex thoughts, a slow but encouraging sign of progress. One rainy afternoon, nearly a year after moving to Portland, Albert sat with Jake at Margaret's kitchen table. Emma was at a friend's birthday party, and Margaret had gone to pick up groceries, leaving grandfather and grandson alone together. Jake was drawing as usual, his small face scrunched in concentration, as he meticulously colored a scene. Albert watched in comfortable silence, occasionally handing over a requested crayon. When Jake finished, he pushed the drawing across the table. It showed three figures standing before what appeared to be a judge or official, a small boy, a girl, and an older man. The title, written in careful block letters, read, "The Day We Told the Truth." "That's beautiful, Jake," Albert said, studying the image. "Can you tell me about it?" Jake tapped the older figure, then pointed to Albert. He tapped the children, then pointed to himself and made a gesture to indicate Emma. Then he pointed to the judge-like figure and made a questioning face. "You're wondering about the trial?" Albert asked gently. Jake nodded, his eyes serious and intent. This was the conversation Albert had been both expecting and dreading. The twins knew their mother was in prison for doing bad things, but the specifics had been deliberately vague. As they grew older, their questions would naturally become more precise. Where was the line between protecting them from horrific truth and honoring their right to understand their own history? "The judge listened to all the evidence about what your mom did," Albert explained carefully. "There were lots of grown-ups who told what they knew, including me and Dr. Morrison. The judge decided your mom needed to stay in a place where she couldn't hurt anyone else." Jake reached for his notepad and pencil tools he'd been using more frequently to bridge the gap between his thoughts and the world. Slowly he wrote, "Did she hurt Dad?" The directness of the question stole Albert's breath. Jake was only 10 years old, but his perception cut straight to the heart of matters adults tried to obscure. In that moment, Albert made a decision. Not to tell the complete brutal truth, but not to lie either. "Your dad discovered that your mom was doing things that were wrong, and he was going to tell the police. Before he could do that, he had his accident." See, Albert chose each word with extreme care. "The police believe your mom may have caused the accident, but we can't know for certain." Jake absorbed this, his expression unreadable. Then he wrote another question. "Is that why he sends messages?" Albert's heart nearly stopped. What messages, Jake? Instead of writing, Jake pulled his tablet from his backpack and navigated to the text message app. He showed Albert a series of texts from an unknown number, each containing simple messages: "Watching over you, proud of your drawing today. Love you always." "When did these start?" Albert asked, struggling to keep his voice calm. Jake held up 9 fingers, 9 months ago around the time they'd moved to Portland. "Have you told anyone else about these?" Jake shook his head. then wrote, "Dad said secret." Albert's mind raced through possibilities. Someone playing a cruel prank. But how would they have Jake's contact information or know about his drawings? Some kind of automated service Margaret had set up to comfort the children, but she would have mentioned it. Or something more sinister. Someone attempting to manipulate Jake the way Sarah had manipulated them all. "May I see your tablet for a little while? I'd like to look into these messages." Jake nodded, then wrote one more sentence that sent chills down Albert's spine. "Dad knew you would help." That evening, after the children were asleep, Albert showed the messages to Margaret. Her face paled as she scrolled through them. "This is deeply concerning. We need to contact the police immediately." "I agree, but we need to tread carefully. Jake believes these are from Marcus. Finding out it's someone pretending to be his dead father could traumatize him all over again." And they contacted Detective Martinez, who, despite being in another state, took their concerns seriously and coordinated with Portland authorities to trace the messages. The investigation moved quickly, the urgency heightened by the potential threat to a child who had already endured so much. 3 days later, Martinez called with unexpected news. "We've traced the messages to a scheduling service originally set up by Marcus Thompson approximately 2 years ago, shortly before his death. He created hundreds of pre-written texts to be delivered to both children over many years, triggered by specific dates or randomly distributed within certain time frames." Albert sank into the nearest chair, overwhelmed. Marcus programmed messages to his children before he died, but why? Based on his other preparations, the recordings, the hidden evidence, it appears he suspected he might not survive his investigation into his mother's death. The service required periodic authentication to continue sending messages. When he didn't provide that authentication, after his death, the system went dormant until it was reactivated. Reactivated by whom? That's where it gets interesting. The reactivation occurred from an IP address associated with your son's old laptop, the one police cataloged among his possessions and returned to you after the investigation closed. Albert remembered the laptop stored in a box he'd brought to Portland, but never unpacked. "It's been sitting in my storage closet, powered off, since I moved here. Someone turned it on about 9 months ago, accessed the scheduling service using saved passwords, and reactivated the message distribution. The timing coincides with your move to Portland." Albert thought of Jake, quiet and observant, always watching, absorbing everything around him. "I think I know who did it." The next morning, Albert sat down with Jake alone. "I looked into the messages you've been getting," he began gently. "They're very special. Your dad created them before his accident so he could still talk to you and Emma even if something happened to him. He was very smart that way." Jake's eyes widened, a mixture of vindication and sadness crossing his face. "What I'm wondering is how the messages started again after we moved here. The computer that controls them was packed away." Albert watched Jake carefully. "Did you find Dad's laptop in my closet?" Slowly Jake nodded, then wrote, "Wanted to see his pictures." "And you turned it on and found a program running?" Another nod followed by written words. "It asked for password. I tried his camera model. It worked." Of course it had. Marcus had taught his son about his beloved camera equipment from an early age. The model number would have been familiar to Jake. and significant enough to serve as a password hint between father and son. You're not in trouble, Jake. In fact, what you did was amazing. You reconnected with something special your dad created for you. I just needed to make sure the messages were safe. Albert hesitated, then asked, "Does Emma know about the messages?" Jake shook his head, then wrote, "Dad said wait until she's ready." Even from beyond the grave, Marcus was protecting his children, creating a lifeline that transcended death itself. The realization brought both comfort and fresh grief to Albert. His son had known he might die, had prepared for that possibility, and had still chosen to pursue the truth about his mother's murder. The existence of the messages transformed something for Jake. In the weeks that followed, he began to speak again, hesitantly at first, then with increasing confidence. His first spoken words in over a year came one evening as Albert was saying goodnight. "I miss Dad," Jake whispered, his voice rough from disuse. Albert pulled him close, his heart breaking and healing simultaneously. "I miss him too, buddy. So much. He was brave," Jake continued, "like you." Those simple words healed something in Albert's soul. The burden he'd carried since Helen's death, the weight of his blindness, his failure to protect his family, lightened slightly. Marcus had been brave, and in his own way, so had Albert. They'd both faced the monster in their midst, though only Albert had survived to tell the tale. Jake began sharing some of his father's messages with Emma, who alternated between excitement and tears at this unexpected connection to their dad. While Jake had treasured the secret communion with his father, Emma found comfort in having tangible proof of her father's love and foresight. "Did Daddy know he was going to die?" she asked Albert one afternoon, clutching her tablet with Marcus's latest message displayed. "Not exactly," Albert answered carefully. "But he knew his work was dangerous, and he wanted to make sure you and Jake always knew how much he loved you, no matter what happened. Like a time capsule," Emma said, nodding, with the wisdom of a child who had experienced too much loss. "He put his love in a time capsule for us." For Albert, the discovery brought a profound shift in how he viewed their family's tragedy. The story wasn't only about Sarah's betrayal and the lives she'd destroyed. It was also about Marcus's foresight and love extending beyond death to care for his children. It was about Helen's careful documentation of her symptoms, her attempt to protect her family even as her mind and body failed her. It was about the resilience of those left behind. 2 children finding their way forward, a sister stepping in to provide a loving home, and Albert himself rebuilding his life around a new purpose. On what would have been Helen's 62nd birthday, Albert took the twins to the Japanese garden in Portland. As they wandered the serene paths, Emma skipping ahead while Jake walked thoughtfully beside his grandfather, Albert felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. "Did Grandma Helen like gardens?" Jake asked, his voice still soft but no longer rare. "She loved them. She had the most amazing rose bushes at our old house. Your dad used to hide among them, playing dinosaurs until she'd chase him out for trampling her flowers." Albert smiled at the memory. She would have loved this place. Jake nodded, processing this new piece of family history. Dad says in his messages that when good people die, they don't really leave. They stay in the stories we tell and the ways we live. Do you think that's true? Albert looked at his grandson, so serious, so much like Marcus, in the tilt of his head and the thoughtful expression in his eyes. I think your dad was very wise. And I think as long as we keep talking about Grandma Helen and your dad sharing memories and stories, they're still with us in all the ways that matter most. Emma rejoined them, breathless from exploring. I found a pond with huge fish. Come see. She grabbed their hands, pulling them forward with the irresistible enthusiasm of childhood. As Albert allowed himself to be led down the path, he glanced back, once almost expecting to see Helen and Marcus walking behind them, smiling at the tableau of grandfather and grandchildren moving forward together. Of course, the path was empty of ghosts, but somehow, in the dappled sunlight filtering through Japanese maples and the laughter of Helen's grandchildren, in the stories that would continue to be told for generations to come, they were present nonetheless. Some wounds never fully heal, but they do transform us. Albert had learned that grief doesn't diminish love. It proves its endurance. And in the end, that's what remained. After all the betrayal and lost love that survived death that reached across time, through messages and memories that rebuilt itself in new forms for those left behind. Not an ending, but a continuation. Not completion, but transformation. In his journal, that night, Albert wrote words he finally believed. The story of our family is not defined by how some of us died, but by how all of us loved.